What you're seeing there is the main leaderboard, as it were, at the Results Operations Centre. What we've been talking about throughout tonight is the very real possibility of more coalition governments, hopefully this time not as messy as they were before. But we're seeing a picture in the big cities where the ANC is possibly losing even more ground than it lost in 2016. That means it'll have to work with some of the smaller parties. The DA also losing a bit of ground, and what we're seeing is that we can see the big parties losing, the EFF winning slightly, ticking up slightly, and Action SA then coming in. Let me show you some of these big metros. I'm going to ask Emil, our researcher, to come in. I understand that you're not mic'd. You can just help me with the touchscreen. And what we're going to do is bring up Johannesburg, which of course is the big one, where the ANC lost ground last time. We saw that coalition between the DA and the EFF, that fell apart. Right now we have an ANC mayor, but look what is happening here. So we're on 22% of the votes. The ANC is sitting at 38%. Last time it had 45%, and I can tell you that the CSIR, Emil, projecting that these are going to go down even further, the ANC figures. I wonder if you can bring up that projection for me, but quickly look at how Action SA is performing in Johannesburg. 17.86%. Herman Mashaba saying that that party will get over 20% according to his projection. According to the CSIR, a little bit of a different projection, saying Action SA more like 12%. It'll be where the EFF is, but the DA also losing ground. Look there, 21%. Last time it had 38%, and that trend of the two big parties losing ground is expected to continue. Let's see if we can quickly bring up Ekurhuleni. Now here was where a coalition government worked. In Ekurhuleni, the ANC needed smaller parties. It was just shy of 50% last time, but the coalition worked and it's been relatively stable. Now things are looking a little bit more dicey. The ANC at 38% or so. Remember, this is only 31% of the votes counted. But the CSIR projection there for the ANC is that it will hover around 38%. The DA could hover at around 29%. The EFF going up slightly. It's now at 14%. Last time it was at 11%. And again, Action SA coming in fourth here with around 7% of the votes. So this means that somebody's going to have to work with somebody. The ANC, well, Action SA saying it won't work with the ANC. Last time the EFF and the DA worked together and that fell apart in Tshwane and in Johannesburg. Let's quickly look at Tshwane. So these are three massive cities in Gauteng, the industrial hub. And here is where we've had messy politics affecting service delivery. Tshwane, remember, currently has a DA mayor. There's been a lot of churn there, a lot of change in mayorship in Tshwane. But this was where the ANC chose to launch its manifesto. It was that serious for the ANC, and it's really hoping desperately for a win in Tshwane. Let's see, the DA with 40%, it was in the lead last time with 41%. That's hovering around the same. ANC going down. Last time it was on 41%, although we don't have much of Tshwane voted yes yet. Third, FF Plus at nearly 10%. Finally, Vuyo, before we continue this discussion of coalition politics, let's look at Nelson Mandela Bay, which again has been such a troubled municipality. So much churn and so much infighting, service delivery suffering. Nelson Mandela Bay has an incredible amount of pit toilets still. All right, let's see where we are. 22% of the vote, the ANC sitting on 42%, the DA around 40%, trailing in Nelson Mandela Bay, the EFF nearly 7%. I can tell you there the predictions are different though. The CSIR saying that the DA will win Nelson Mandela Bay, but not with a clear majority. It'll look at about 43%, so you'll have the DA in the lead. But again, the DA will have to work with some of the smaller parties or the DA and the ANC, unlikely, but they will have to find a way to work together. The EFF possibly could hover around here, and the ANC expected to lose ground. The CSI projections are at 39%, so the ANC could lose ground here. So thank you very much, Emil, and I guess we're just painting a picture for you of these possibilities of hung coalition governments, well, hung cities again, coalition governments coming in again, and the hope again that the politicians will be able to work together because service delivery suffers when you don't have a mayor, when you have the EFF and the DA infighting, when you have the UDM fighting with the DA, the fallout that we saw in Nelson Mandela Bay and all the repercussions of that. So the plea is for politicians to be mature, to make these cities work for you.
Indeed. And that is in fact the conversation I'm going to have now with both Terry Tselane and Ebrahim Fakir, on the back, of course, of those conversations you were having with the senior officials of some of the political parties, including both, the two biggest parties, as well as your Action SA and your EFF, who are most likely going to be the biggest kingmakers in the four metros that look certain to be the mostly hotly contested ones. And they are the ones, Ebrahim Fakir, that are going to give us a sense of whether we have learned any lessons, from the past 5 years, and whether the politicians are going to stubbornly stick to some of the comments that they have made during the course of this campaign, or whether they have been humbled or emboldened by the results that we are seeing beginning to emerge today. Francis earlier spoke to the ANC and the Democratic Alliance, and they both seem a lot more amenable now to a lot of conversations that they pretended ahead of yesterday they wouldn't even entertain.
Well, they have to, because they're forced to do so. I mean, we've all learned the lessons of what minority governments can end up like if you don't have proper principles that you agree on, a framework under which you're going to cooperate and work, because you then withdraw your support from issue to issue depending on what you can get out of it and all of that. So clearly, we've learned the lesson as citizens, as voters. I'm not sure the party leaders have because they carry on with the same kind of arrogance and disdain for the public. And perhaps this is a moment in which they will be humbled. But look, in 2016, many parties were humbled, right? Including the governing party or the national governing party now. And it doesn't appear as if they learned the lesson.
But then they didn't have at the time the real practical experience of having to,
but it was clear what being in opposition would require.
Yeah.
The being in opposition would require that you would now do the things you failed to do when you were in government, such as exercise oversight over the governing party. Meanwhile, they didn't decide to exercise serious oversight. They decided to play silly buggers by reconfiguring, deconstructing the current, whatever the coalitions were extant at the time, and then decided that they must now re-inject themselves into power and reconstruct the government. So if they continue in that way of playing silly buggers, then you're going to have the continuous instability instead of choose to be either in opposition and then play the role that opposition political parties play or don't. The trouble, though, with many of the parties is that it doesn't appear, when you ask about learning the lessons, it doesn't appear as if they learn the lessons. Because take, for example, the ANC. After 2016, I think the lessons were quite clear. Stop the arrogance, find some level of coherence inside the party. Of course, the context then was very different, because remember, they were going into the Nasrec or Nasrec conference. The tensions were high. The factionalism was breaking down into factions, not just factions but fractions inside the party. That now, the fractionalism may be less, but the factionalism is still pretty much persistent, right? So the context inside the ANC has changed. They're now opening opening up discussions around when the final results actually out. What will they do with President Ramaphosa? Because he's led the party to this kind of performance, ignoring the fact that the trajectory was downward from 2009.
What about the so-called kingmakers, though? Because they seem to feel less of an obligation, to act responsibly in the interests of the people and the economies of these metros. I mean, if you listened to Herman Mashaba just now, a short while ago, speaking to Francis, says, we have to make sure that we don't give the ANC a chance to return. If you listened to Mpile Mauto, who's the Treasurer General of the EFF, on the floor a short while ago, she says we went to war and our war is about dislodging the ANC, which then suggests that that may be the sort of driving ambition and less so the interests of the people of those metropolitan areas.
Here's the thing, right? So you say, what lessons do they learn? Clearly they don't learn lessons because they carry on, all of them, as if this is all about their incremental advantage. This is about the pure rational approach to maximizing what is in their party interest, not the public interest. Now, you have an opportunity to reconfigure the political system in a way in which voters are empowered to a greater degree than parties are. That might change the incentive structure by which they start to behave, because they then become much more dependent on being responsive to what citizens and what voters are looking for rather than what is in their own incremental internal advantage. So that's an opportunity I suspect they might miss, depending on what Parliament decides about the future of the electoral system. I'm not saying that's going to be the solution or the panacea to all of the problems. Clearly, political culture, political maturity is going to matter. What's interesting to me, though, is that of all of these parties who claim to be speaking on behalf of a constituency in society, I'm not sure that those constituencies would echo exactly what the party leaders... Exactly. That the party leaders are all about our campaign starts now for 2024. We're going to war and we make sure that we keep the ANC out.
Exactly what Herman Mashaba was saying down there. But Ebrahim Fakir Terry Tselane was talking about, incentive structure, but also the framework, which is the conversation we started to have earlier on, which I said, from what I hear now, is being taken to the political parties, to get their buy-in. Apparently, one of the proposals that are being made is of doing away with, executive mayor. Have something akin to an exco, that can then, kind of rule together, hopefully in the interest of course, your maturity and other things will still have to come in. I'm curious to know what your thoughts would be around something like that. So you don't have a winner takes all kind of thing. There's a core governance, and of course, from the framework, this will develop into ultimately legislation, but it's going to be interesting, of course, to hear what the political parties have to say. But I bet you, I can say this probably without even knowing what the ANC in particular is going to say, that they are going to jump for it, because I think they feel, the need to actually act a lot more responsibly than they have done up until now.
Whatever is going to be happening here in relation to hung municipalities will have an effect in all other municipalities that are there. So currently the structures that are keeping the municipalities together, it is the Municipal Structures Act and Municipal Systems Act. It is not possible...
But which don't speak to the coalitions, or coalition arrangements.
Absolutely. So it is not possible, therefore, just to deal with one aspect without actually reviewing the whole system. Ebrahim has just spoken about the electoral system as well. Because, as you know, the Constitutional Court has actually instructed Parliament to finalize the new electoral system to be in place by June next year. So political parties who are sitting in Parliament there, when they look at this issue, eventually trying to create a proper framework, they've got to take in consideration all these other factors that are going to be impacted upon by this processes. The fact that we're going to have such a proliferation of hung municipalities forces political parties now to review the whole system. And the system that we were talking about earlier on, of having an executive of some sort, it's one of the options that could actually be developed in order to be able to deal with this. But I also wanted to say the following, that whilst we are focusing on governance and then how various partners are working towards being partners in governance, remember some of the political parties would actually be comfortable being opposition and then trying to structure their relationship with the eyes on 2024, because 2024 is around the corner. So some of the political parties that will feel compromised by being in a coalition would actually prefer to opt out, and then hence the kind of the talk that we've heard from some of the political parties on the floor earlier on.
That's the kind of thinking in the parties which leads to the level of mistrust and distrust that people have, not just in parties but in the institutions generally, because they'll believe, what is it that you're actually making decisions about? You're making decisions about only those things which are to your advantage, not to the benefit of the public. So it would make sense to me that you try to regulate coalitions. I'm not so sure about legislation, but surely some sort of amendment is required in the Systems and Structures Act to ensure that a degree of proportionality is reflected in the composition of the executives, because it is counterintuitive that the largest party, and this is the lesson from 2016, the largest party has always simply been left out of that governing coalition, right? Which means that the largest portion of voters who participated were actually effectively left out. So democracy and democratic government is partly about representation and responsiveness, but if you're leaving that large number of people completely out and their representatives completely out of the equation, it is unfair, and it's counterintuitive to what the principles of democracy ought to be. So some kind of thing which not necessarily regulates coalitions, but at least gives a fair reflection of the actual result in the composition of government itself.
You're right. I mean, Ebrahim, truth be told also, I mean, it's also been, or how badly these coalitions have gone or been managed also has to do with the behaviors, attitudes, of the players, themselves, less to do with everything else. So the question is how you, can you really regulate that, or will,
Look, I think it's better to regulate it. Regulate it to a certain degree, because the thing is, to the extent that the personalities matter, the structure of government at the moment also matters, because what you concede at a municipal level, you might want to gain at a provincial level, and what you might lose or concede or gain at a provincial level might be a chip you want to use at a national level. So once these coalitions are so widespread, and that new negotiations are required every single time they are composed, you're going to use that as a bargaining chip for what you can get at provincial level, and you will use that as a bargaining chip for what you can get at national level, which means that you will escalate the instability rather than resolve the instability.
But I want to come back to a point you made earlier, Terry. When you said that, as we go forward, it'll be in their interests, and I suppose we can safely assume that politicians will know and appreciate that the system in its entirety, needs to be reviewed. But do politicians think like that? Because it would seem to me that if a system suits them, they will rather stick with that and maybe find a different solution to the other set of problems that they may have. In other words, they begin to like pick and choose rather than look for something like a blanket, so to speak, approach which will be in the interest of democracy, in the interest of the people, as we like to say. But it seems to me that it's really in the nature of politicians to like really pick and choose, you know, and you know, stick with what doesn't work if it actually gives them advantages elsewhere.
You know, the context does matter. So the context of the current elections is very, very important. Remember, we're talking about a very low voter turnout. Why did people not participate in this? There's a lot of dissatisfaction about the current system. So what options and alternatives do political parties have? Because remember now, what it basically says is that there are multitudes of people who are outside the system there. A very active citizen who are going to be holding these political parties accountable through protests, through all sorts of things. So if at the end of the day, political parties just enter into relationship that do not deliver anything, there's going to be so much pressure that they are forced to develop systems that will be able to ensure delivery of services.
But remember, you're talking about people who still haven't accepted, those who have not done so fully. The fact that they are responsible for a low vote turnout, they are responsible for the disillusionment that we're seeing among voters. The politicians haven't accepted that. It's us who are sitting there and talking about that every day. They want to blame anything and everyone else, including the IEC for what we are seeing. That's a reality.
No, that's true. But I mean, when we live here, they're going to be reminded through the protests by people who are outside there, people who did not participate in these elections, that they do matter and the issues that they're raising do matter. And they're going to be forced to begin to look into those issues and try to create systems that will respond to the issues that people are raising. So at the moment, what they're doing, yes, they may not have reflected properly on the implications of what has just happened. But the fact that we've got such a low voter turnout and then so many multitudes of people outside who have said we are not going to be participating in the formal structures, we prefer informal structures, and we're going to be putting pressure on you to be able to deliver this, the services, is one of the major considerations that they're going to have to make.
I'm not convinced, Terry. I'll tell you why. because protests have been happening since 2000. That's closer now 2 decades that this thing's been going on. These guys have remained unresponsive. That's my first empirical example. The second is look at floor crossing. They knew that when they enacted floor crossing the first time round, it went against the grain of all of the principles of the electoral system that we had. They went and fudged the argument in court and then got a political deal to say, no, we need to facilitate this floor crossing to ensure that there's stability from the breakup of the alliance between the National Party and the Democratic Party then, and so on. Then, when it was convenient for them, they decided, oh no, floor crossing is no good, it's against democratic principles, let's do away with floor crossing. So there's consistent capriciousness on their behalf, and I hope that they take what you say seriously and actually reflect on it. But I don't share that level of confidence. I'm prepared to be surprised.
Quickly, Ebrahim, do you know what other jurisdictions, even around the world, have done to sort of drive this point home, or at least to bind politicians, to get them to appreciate, if they can't appreciate it for themselves, at least for the sake of the nation, to appreciate that they have to do certain things in certain ways.
There's been a global crisis of confidence in politics and in democratic government. The tragedy is that it happens at a time in history that those societies which are still undergoing it at least have durable institutions which they've built up over time. Ours are relatively
They're
fragile.
still enduring.
Yeah, and they endure over time. So those societies can endure a period of bad politics or malified politics. Ours are not. Our institutions are still fairly nascent. They still require serious attention and nascent, attention to develop over time. And that's what our politicians miss. That you can't take a pure rational actor approach to the way in which you're going to conduct politics. You have to moderate that a little bit with what is in your interest, but balancing it what is in the interest of society broadly.